David was just like any other guy in his 30s. He worked at the local airport, fixing planes and checking their engines. Every day was pretty much the same. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner, and take a walk around his neighborhood. He wasn't the type of person who believed in crazy stories about space visitors or flying objects in the sky. To him, everything had a simple explanation based on science and facts. That Tuesday evening started exactly like hundreds of others before it. David finished his leftover pizza, washed his plate, and grabbed his keys. The summer air was warm and pleasant as he stepped outside his small house on Cherry Lane. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and pink colors. It was his favorite time of day, quiet, peaceful, and perfect for clearing his mind after 8 hours of working on airplane parts. He always took the same route through his neighborhood, past the Miller family's house with their perfectly trimmed lawn, round the corner where old Mr. Thompson always sat on his porch reading the newspaper, and down Maple Street where most of the houses had their lights on and families were settling. And for the evening, David knew almost everyone on these streets. Even if he only waved and smiled when he saw them dot as he walked, he thought about normal things. His boss had mentioned they might get a big contract next month, which could mean overtime pay. His car was making a weird noise that he needed to check this weekend. His sister had called earlier asking if he wanted to come to his nephew's birthday party next Saturday. Regular life stuff that filled his head during these evening walks. The neighborhood was especially quiet tonight. Usually, he'd see a few other people walking their dogs or kids riding bikes in their driveways. But tonight, the streets felt almost empty. Even the Johnson house at the end of Maple Street looked darker than usual. That house had been empty for about 3 months now, ever since the elderly couple who lived there moved to live with their daughter in another state. David had always felt a little sad walking past that empty house. The Johnsons had been good neighbors, the kind who brought you soup when you were sick and always waved from their garden. Now their yard was getting overgrown, and someone had put a for sale sign that creaked whenever the wind blew. He was thinking about how neighborhoods change over time when something caught his eye. There was a light coming from behind the Johnson house. Not the harsh white light of a flashlight or the yellow glow of a porch light. This was different, softer, with a blue tint that seemed to pulse gently like a heartbeat. David stopped walking and squinted toward the light. His first thought was that maybe someone was finally looking at the house. Real estate agents sometimes showed properties in the evening, and maybe they were using some kind of special lamp to check the backyard. That made sense. Everything always had a logical explanation. But as he stood there watching, the light didn't move around like someone would move a flashlight. It just sat there, pulsing steadily. David felt a strange pull of curiosity that was stronger than his usual desire to mind his own business. He'd lived in this neighborhood for 7 years, and he'd never seen anything like this before. He told himself he was just being a good neighbor. If someone was snooping around the Johnson property, maybe he should check it out. The family had asked him to keep an eye on things while the house was empty. They'd even given him their phone number in case anything seemed wrong. David left the sidewalk and walked across the street toward the Joe Henson house. The closer he got, the more unusual. The light seemed it wasn't coming from inside the house. All those windows were dark. The light was definitely coming from the backyard, behind the house where the Johnsons used to have their vegetable garden. His footsteps slowed as he reached the edge of the property. The smart part of his brain was telling him to just call the police if he thought something was wrong, but his curiosity was stronger than his caution. He'd always been the type of person who needed to see things for himself before making decisions. The Johnsons' backyard was surrounded by a wooden fence that was now partly broken in a few places. David found a gap wide enough to squeeze through, though he felt a little guilty about technically trespassing. He reminded himself that he was just checking on things for the family. Once inside the backyard, he could see that the light was coming from the very back of the property, near the old oak tree where the Johnsons used to hang a tire swing for their grandchildren. David crouched down and moved carefully through the overgrown grass and weeds, trying not to make noise. What he saw when he got close enough made him freeze completely. His brain struggled to process what his eyes were showing him. All his beliefs about logical explanations and scientific facts suddenly felt very small and inadequate for what was right in front of him. The pulsing blue light was coming from something that definitely wasn't made by any company on Earth. David's heart started beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. What he was looking at made no sense at all. In the clearing behind the Johnson house, sitting as calmly as a parked car, was something that looked like it came from a science fiction movie. The object was about the size of a small bus, but shaped completely different from anything he'd ever seen. It was smooth and metallic, almost like liquid silver, that had been shaped into a perfect oval. The surface seemed to shift and shimmer, slightly, as if it was alive. The blue light he'd seen from the street was coming from underneath it, creating a soft glow that lit up the grass and nearby trees. There was no sound at all, not even the hum you'd expect from any kind of machine or vehicle. David crouched behind the old oak tree, his hands shaking as he gripped the rough bark. Every logical part of his mind was screaming that this couldn't be real. Maybe he was dreaming. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. Maybe he was having some kind of breakdown from working too much overtime at the airport. But the object looked completely solid and real. He could see his reflection in its shiny surface. He could smell the summer grass and hear a cricket chirping. Somewhere nearby, all his senses were telling him this was actually happening, even though his brain refused to accept it. For what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, David just stared. He was trying to figure out what to do next. Should he run home and call someone? Should he take a picture with his phone? Should he get closer to see if it was some kind of military vehicle he'd never heard of? Before he could make any decision, something incredible happened. A section of the smooth surface suddenly opened up, like a door that had no visible handle or seam. The opening appeared silently, without any mechanical sounds or lights. It was as if the metal simply decided to create a doorway. David held his breath and pressed himself closer to the tree trunk. His whole body was tense, ready to run if he needed to, but he couldn't look away. This was the most amazing and terrifying thing that had ever happened to him. 3 figures stepped out of the opening. David's eyes went wide as he tried to understand what he was seeing. 2 of them were tall, much taller than any normal person. They moved in a graceful way that reminded him of dancers or athletes. Even from his hiding spot behind the tree, he could see they had long arms and legs, and their heads seemed slightly larger than what you'd expect for their body size. The 3rd figure was much smaller. At first, David thought it might be a child, but as his eyes adjusted to the strange blue light, he realized this small being looked different too. All 3 of them had skin that seemed to have a slight glow to it, and their eyes were larger and more reflective than human eyes. David wanted to run. Every survival instinct he had was telling him to get out of there as fast as possible. But he felt frozen in place, like his feet had grown roots into the ground. He'd never experienced fear quite like this before. Not just scared, but completely overwhelmed by something so far outside his normal experience that his brain didn't know how to react. The tall figures seemed to be having some kind of conversation, though David couldn't hear any words. They moved their hands in flowing gestures and occasionally touched each other's arms. In what looked like a gentle, caring way, they seemed calm and peaceful, not threatening or aggressive, but it was the small figure that caught David's attention the most. While the tall ones were focused on each other, the little being was looking around the backyard with obvious curiosity. Its head turned this way and that, taking in the broken fence, the overgrown garden, and the old swing that still hung from a branch of the oak tree. Then, without any warning, the small being's gaze landed directly on David's hiding spot. Their eyes met across the dim backyard, and David felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Those large, dark eyes seemed to look right through him, seeing not just his physical presence, but somehow reaching deeper. David expected the being to be startled, or afraid, or to alert the others that they were being watched. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. The small figure's face lit up with what could only be described as pure joy and excitement. It was an expression so human and familiar that David felt his fear begin to mix with confusion. The little being took a step toward David's tree, then another. Its movements were eager, but not threatening. As it got closer, David could see more details. The being did look very much like a child, probably around 7 or 8 years old if you were comparing to human children. But the proportions were slightly different, more delicate somehow, with longer fingers and that distinctive large-eyed face. When the small being was about halfway between the strange vehicle and David's hiding spot, it did something that shattered every assumption David had about what was happening. It opened its mouth and spoke in perfect, clear English. What it said made David's world turn completely upside down. The small being's voice rang out clearly in the quiet night air, filled with excitement and pure happiness. "Mom, Dad, my Earth brother is here." David felt like someone had just hit him with a baseball bat. The words made no sense at all, but the way the little being said them, with such genuine joy and familiarity, made his stomach flip upside down. Earth brother, what could that possibly mean? The tall figures immediately turned their attention to where their child was pointing. David could see their body language change, from relaxed to alert, but not in a threatening way. It was more like parents who suddenly realized their kid had wandered off and found something unexpected. The small being started running toward David's hiding spot behind the oak tree. As it got closer, David could see its face more clearly in the blue light from their vehicle. The features were definitely not human, but there was something about the expression, the bright eyes, the excited smile, the way it moved, that felt incredibly familiar, like seeing someone you knew well after a long time apart. "Please don't hide," the little being called out as it approached. "I know it's you. I've been looking for you for so long." David's legs felt weak. He wanted to run, but he also felt strangely drawn to stay. There was something in that young voice that touched a part of his mind he couldn't quite reach, like trying to remember a dream that slips away the moment you wake up. The child stopped about 10 feet away from the tree and tilted its head to one side, studying David with those large, dark eyes. "You're bigger now," it said with a slight giggle, "but you still have the same kind eyes. And you still bite your lip when you're nervous, just like when we were little." David's hand unconsciously went to his mouth. He did have a habit of biting his lip when he was stressed or confused. But how could this being possibly know that? He'd never seen anything like this child before in his life, or had he? The tall figures approached slowly, their movements careful and non-threatening. The one that seemed to be female spoke first, and her voice had a musical quality that was both alien and somehow comforting. "Please forgive our daughter's excitement," she said in perfect English, though with an accent David couldn't identify. "She has spoken of little else during our journey here. We were not certain you would remember, but she was convinced we would find you. Remember what?" David's head was spinning. He stepped out from behind the tree, his curiosity finally winning over his fear. "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else. I've never met any of you before." The small being's face fell slightly, but then brightened again with determination. "You don't remember because they made you forget, but I never forgot. You taught me how to whistle, and I taught you how to make those little light patterns with your fingers. We used to play that game where we tried to guess what the other one was thinking." As the child spoke, something strange started happening in David's mind. Flashes of images began appearing, brief, unclear pictures that felt like memories but couldn't possibly be real. A room with walls that glowed softly, playing some kind of game with colored lights, learning to make whistling sounds. The face of a much younger version of the being standing in front of him. David shook his head hard, trying to clear away these impossible thoughts. "This is crazy. I would remember meeting people like you. This is the kind of thing you don't forget." The male figure stepped forward, his expression gentle but serious. "Memory can be a complicated thing, young friend. Sometimes what we think we know about our own past is not the complete story. Show him the mark," the child said eagerly, looking up at her parents. "Show him the mark on his shoulder." He'll remember then, David frowned. What mark? I don't have any marks, or scars, or anything like that. But even as he said it, his hand moved automatically to his left shoulder, to a spot where he'd always had a small, perfectly round birthmark about the size of a coin. He'd never thought much about it. Lots of people had birthmarks, but the way the child was looking at him made him suddenly very aware of it. It's not a birthmark, the female being said softly. It's a connection mark. It was placed there so we could find you again someday, and so that deep down, some part of you would always remember us. The images in David's head were getting stronger and clearer. He could see himself as a young boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, in a place that definitely wasn't Earth. He was laughing and playing with the small being who now stood before him, both of them much younger. There were lessons about stars and planets, gentle beings who treated him with kindness, and a feeling of being part of something bigger and more wonderful than anything he'd ever experienced. We were so young, he whispered, not even realizing he'd spoken out loud. The child's face broke into the biggest smile David had ever seen. You do remember. I knew you would. I told Mom and Dad that the connection was still strong, that you'd remember if we just found you. David felt tears starting to form in his eyes, though he didn't understand why. These memories felt completely real, but they were impossible. How could he have spent time with beings from another world and then just forgotten about it? How could something so incredible have been hidden in his own mind? Why, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why don't I remember? And why are you here now? The two adult beings exchanged a look that seemed to carry an entire conversation. Finally, the female stepped closer to David, her expression full of compassion. Because, dear one, it is time for you to choose. David stared at the three beings standing in front of him, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. Choose what? Before he could ask, the female being extended her hand toward him in a gesture that seemed both alien and somehow familiar. My name is Kira, she said gently. This is my mate, Zen, and our daughter Naya. We know this must be overwhelming for you. Would you be willing to come aboard our ship for a short time? We can help you understand what happened all those years ago. Every logical part of David's brain screamed that getting on an alien spacecraft was probably the worst idea in human history. But looking at little Naya's hopeful face and feeling those strange memories getting stronger by the minute, he found himself nodding. Just for a few minutes, he said, his voice shaking slightly. But if I want to leave, you'll let me go, right? Of course, Zen replied, his deep voice warm and reassuring. You are not our prisoner. You never were. You were our guest and our friend. Walking toward the craft felt like moving through a dream. The closer David got, the more details he could see. The surface wasn't just smooth. It seemed to ripple slightly, like water, but stayed solid under his touch. When they reached the opening, Naya took his hand with her small, delicate fingers. Don't be scared, she whispered. It's just like you remember, only bigger now because we're all bigger. Stepping inside was like entering a completely different world. The walls glowed with soft, warm light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The floor felt solid but somehow cushioned, like walking on the perfect combination of carpet and firm ground. Everything was curved and organic looking, as if the ship had been grown rather than built. David's eyes widened as more memories began flooding back. He remembered this place, or at least a place very much like it. He could recall sitting in a similar room, much smaller than he was now, listening to Kira tell him stories about distant stars and planets where her people lived. Sit here, Naya said, guiding him to what looked like a chair that seemed to form itself around his body for perfect comfort. Mom's going to help you remember everything. It won't hurt, I promise. Kira approached carrying something that looked like a headband made of crystal and soft metal. This device will help unlock the memories that were gently sealed away when you were returned to your family. The process was done to protect you, a 7-year-old child carrying memories of life among the stars would have faced difficulties that no young person should endure. As Kira placed the device on David's head, he felt a warm, tingling sensation spread through his mind. It wasn't uncomfortable, more like the feeling of remembering something that had been on the tip of your tongue. Suddenly, the memories came rushing back like a dam bursting open. He could see himself as a small boy, not scared but excited, being chosen for what Kira's people called the exchange. It wasn't an abduction. It was more like an educational program, a cultural exchange between worlds. He remembered spending 3 wonderful months aboard their ship, learning about their peaceful civilization. They had shown him planets covered in crystal cities, oceans that glow with natural light, and forests where the trees sang in harmony with the wind. Naya had been just a toddler then, but even at that young age, she had been fascinated by the strange little human boy who had joined their family temporarily. The memories were so vivid now. He could recall learning their language, which sounded like music. He remembered Zen teaching him about the stars and how their ships could travel between them. Kira had shown him how their people lived in harmony with nature, never taking more than they needed, always giving back to the worlds they visited. Most importantly, he remembered the bond he had formed with this family. They had treated him not as an experiment or a curiosity, but as a beloved child. Naya had followed him everywhere, and he had felt like her protective big brother even though he was only a year older. "You were so happy here," Kira said softly, watching David's face as the memories returned. "But we knew you belonged with your own kind, on your own world. When it came time to return you to your family, you cried and asked if you could visit again someday." "I remember," David whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I remember asking Naya to come with me to Earth. I wanted to show her my toys and my dog and teach her how to ride a bicycle." Naya giggled, the same musical laugh he now remembered from their childhood. "I wanted to go so badly, but Mom and Dad said I wasn't old enough for Earth yet. They promised we'd come back to see you when I was older." "But why now?" David asked. "Why come back after all these years?" Zen leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Because our people are preparing to make first contact with your world officially. The time of hiding is coming to an end. Your planet is reaching a stage in its development where we believe peaceful contact is possible. And because," Naya added with excitement, "I never stop asking about you. Every year on my birthday, I would ask if we could visit Earth to see how you were doing. Mom and Dad finally said yes when I turned 16 in your years." David looked around at the family who had once been his family too, feeling a strange mix of joy and sadness. The memories were all back now, not just the big moments, but the small ones too. Reading stories together, sharing meals that tasted like nothing on Earth, playing games that involved moving lights with their minds, and most of all, the feeling of being completely loved and accepted. "What happens now?" he asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. "Do you have to make me forget again?" Kira and Zen exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Kira spoke. "That choice, dear one, is entirely yours to make." David sat in the comfortable chair inside the alien ship, his mind reeling from all the recovered memories. The weight of the choice ahead of him felt enormous. He could go back to his normal life, have his memories sealed away again, and continue working at the airport like nothing had ever happened. Or he could keep these incredible memories and somehow figure out how to live with the knowledge that he had a second family among the stars. "I need to understand something," David said, looking directly at Kira. "If I choose to remember, what does that mean for my life on Earth? How do I go back to fixing airplane engines and eating leftover pizza when I know all of this exists?" Zen smiled, his large eyes twinkling with something that looked like pride. "You always ask the most thoughtful questions, even as a small child. The answer is that remembering doesn't have to mean your Earth life ends. Many humans throughout your history have carried knowledge of our people while living perfectly. Normal lives among their own kind. But there's a third option," Naya said, bouncing slightly in her seat with excitement. "You could come with us, not forever, but for a while. I could show you all the places I wanted to share with you when we were kids. You could see how much our world has changed, meet my friends, visit the crystal cities you love so much." David's heart jumped at the suggestion. But his practical mind immediately started listing all the reasons why it was impossible. I have a job, responsibilities, people who would wonder where I went. I can't just disappear. Actually, Kira said gently, you could. Time moves differently when traveling between worlds. We could show you wonders beyond imagination, and you could be back on Earth before anyone even noticed you were gone. A few weeks for you could be just a few hours in Earth time. The idea was tempting beyond belief, to see alien worlds, to experience technologies beyond human understanding, to spend time with the family he had lost and found again. It was like being offered a chance to live in the most amazing dream ever conceived. But David was also scared. What if something went wrong? What if he couldn't come back? What if the experience changed him so much that he couldn't fit into his regular life anymore? I can see you're worried, Nia said, reaching over to take his hand. But remember, you did this before when you were just a little kid. You were brave then, and you're even braver now. What was I like back then? David asked, curious about his younger self. Fearless. Zen replied immediately. You wanted to try everything, learn everything, see everything. You asked more questions in a day than most beings ask in a lifetime. And you had this amazing ability to find joy in the smallest things. You made us all laugh constantly, Kira added. You found our customs fascinating instead of strange. When we showed you how we communicate with light patterns, you spent hours creating your own patterns and trying to teach them to us. And you were the best big brother ever, Nia said softly. Even though you were only a year older than me, you always made sure I was included in everything. When the older kids would play games that were too advanced for me, you create simpler versions so I could play too. David felt his heart swelling with emotions he hadn't experienced in decades. These weren't just recovered memories, they were recovered feelings of belonging, of being truly loved and valued for exactly who he was. If I go with you, he said slowly, and if I come back to Earth afterward, will I be able to contact you again, or is this a one-time thing? The connection between us was never broken. Kira explained, it was only hidden. Once it's fully restored, we'll always be able to find each other across any distance. The bond between families transcends space and time. David stood up and walked to what he assumed was a window, though it looked more like a wall that had become transparent. Through it, he could see his neighborhood, the same houses, the same streets, the same ordinary world he'd known his entire adult life. But now he also knew there was so much more beyond it. I'm scared, he admitted, but I'm also more excited than I've been in years. When I was a kid, I used to dream about adventures among the stars. I thought I was just being imaginative, but those were actually memories, wasn't I? They were. Nia confirmed, and now you can live new adventures instead of just dreaming about old ones. David turned back to face the family that had shaped his childhood in ways he was only now beginning to understand. The choice wasn't really about whether to remember or forget. Those memories were already back, and he knew he'd never want to lose them again. The real choice was whether to let fear keep him trapped in his small, safe world, or to have the courage to explore the infinite possibilities that lay beyond it. Okay, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I want to go with you. I want to see everything, learn everything, and maybe figure out how to be the bridge between our two worlds when it's time for first contact. Nia leaped up and hugged him with surprising strength. This is going to be the best adventure ever. Wait until you see the singing forests of Altera, and the floating cities of Vex, and the libraries that contain the knowledge of 1,000 worlds. As the ship began to rise silently into the night sky, David looked down at his neighborhood one last time. His house looked so small from above, and his problems seemed even smaller. He was about to embark on a journey that would change everything about how he saw himself and his place in the universe. For the first time in his adult life, David felt truly alive. The scared airplane mechanic was still part of him, but now he was also the brave little boy who had once called the stars his home. And somewhere in the vast cosmos ahead, new adventures were waiting for a family that had never really been apart.